this isn't a creative debate about death of the author. This is about duty to the wider theater community. On July 31st, 2025, the worst Instagram post of all time was made. I remember exactly where I was when it was posted because it was truly a stop everything you're doing and get online moment. I was at work working a night shift and it was 6 a.m. I was wrapping up for the day, chilling in the break room when I casually checked my phone. And I saw an Instagram post that had dropped at 3 a.m. that morning. As I'm reading it, picture time stopping, the camera is pulling out from my face as the room is spinning around me, my eyes are blown wide, I'm hyperventilating, my hands are shaking as I'm typing, and I'm angry. This was a post made by the creators of Tony Award-winning musical Maybe Happy Ending on the show's official Instagram page, responding to the discourse around a recent casting announcement. And when I read it for the first time, I was reasonably sure it was the worst thing I had ever subjected my eyes to. So what did the post say, and how did we get here? If you're not aware, Maybe Happy Ending is a musical that opened on Broadway in 2024, based on a Korean musical of the same name. Both the original and the English language version were written by Hugh Park and Will Aronson, a South Korean and a white American respectively. It went on to win several Tonys this summer, including Best New Musical and Best Lead Actor in a Musical, which went to Darren Criss, who starred as the main character, a retired helper robot named Oliver who falls in love with fellow helper bot Claire. I've seen this musical 3 times, I love it, I made a video essay talking about how great it is. It's great. It's really funny, sweet, moving, and original. It also has an all-Asian American cast. This is, and I must stress, a huge deal. There had been a few musicals with all or mostly Asian casts before, but a musical opening with 2 Asian romantic leads was still remarkable. I'm far from a Broadway historian, but suffice it to say, Asian representation in mainstream musicals has been bad. Complicated, but the headline should include the word bad. Since the eras of The King and I and Miss Saigon, Broadway has slowly inched forward in terms of racial inclusion. Race-blind casting is increasingly common, it's kind of the standard for most shows now, and as a result, there are more and more opportunities for Asians on Broadway. Some musicals have told stories about Asians and Asian Americans, others cast Asians to play parts with no canonical race. As a result, some high-profile roles are now primarily associated with the Asian actors who originated them. Ashley Park in Mean Girls, Philippa Sue in Hamilton, Ava Noblezada Carney, who starred in both Hadestown and The Great Gatsby. And even though it was a revival, Nicole Scherzinger won a Tony this year for Sunset Boulevard. There is absolutely no question that Asian rep is a cut above what it has been for musicals in the past. But for most roles originated by Asian actors, such as the highest profile ones I named above, race isn't relevant to the character, you're arguably not even supposed to notice it. The roles were played by Asians, but they weren't exactly Asian roles. I feel like, before we go further, I need to pause and explain this word I've thrown around a lot. I'm trying to keep this video on the shorter side, so I'm not going to give this topic as in-depth a look as it deserves, but I do think we can break it down into 3 basic components. The first component is the most simple: visibility for audiences. Including people of various races or colors in the cast of a show or movie allows audience members of that background to see themselves in your art. In short, seeing people who look like you for a change. On the flip side, some viewers still might need to get used to seeing people who don't look like them highlighted in mainstream media. Secondly, representation could go deeper and could mean platforming more authentic storylines, especially when the inclusion and diversity extends past just the cast and to the creatives behind the art. It means people from a certain culture telling a story informed by that culture. Therefore, viewers can connect with and learn about cultures that are not their own, while at other times getting to see their own culture highlighted on the stage or screen. Thirdly, and most pragmatically, having representation built into a show means that actors of color have more opportunities for work, especially in theater where the same character could be portrayed by multiple different actors. If there's, for example, a show that employs colorblind casting, then any actor of color at least has a chance at getting hired. If there's a role that's specifically designed to be played by an actor of one race, then at least one actor of that race is guaranteed work. And then Maybe Happy Ending comes along. And to me, each component applies to this show. A Korean musical set in Seoul and on Jeju Island, starring Asian American actors and alternates. And not only does it open on Broadway, a huge feat of itself, but it's a success. Audiences love it, and it wins the Tony for Best New Musical, which if you know anything about Broadway, you know is a big deal. Being able to put Tony winner for Best New Musical on your marquee can mean the difference between a musical closing within a year and smashing at the box office. So it seems like a major win for Asians and Asian Americans on Broadway. There was a high-profile example of a successful Asian musical and a new chance for Asian actors to have jobs on Broadway for potentially years to come. What happened next? Well, Darren Criss, who played the lead role of Oliver, was leaving Maybe Happy Ending. He was the first cast member to leave permanently, so people were eager to see who his full-time replacement would be. Maybe it would be one of the alternates who had previously starred as Oliver. Maybe it would be another celebrity. Maybe a completely unknown Asian actor would get a chance to take the spotlight and become a major name in the world of theater. Then, on July 24th, the production announced on Instagram that Andrew Barth Feldman would be taking over the role for 9 weeks starting in early September. So, obviously, fans of the show, and also anyone else in the theater world paying attention, pointed out how casting a white guy to play an Asian role was weird. Wasn't this the show that was lauded for its all-Asian cast? Wasn't it literally a South Korean show that also takes place in South Korea? Andrew Barth Feldman? Honestly, the primary response people had was confusion.
Now, when I first heard this particular piece of casting news being rumoured, I was confused. Then I started to get it, and then I was confused again.
Many people articulated exactly what made this casting choice tone-deaf, disappointing, and confusing, especially Asian fans. With the immediate, loud, and pretty universal backlash that the casting decision received, it was inevitable that the creatives behind this decision would have to respond in some way. Which writers Hugh Park and Will Aronson did 1 week later on July 31st at 3 a.m. in the form of a statement posted to the show's Instagram. So let's return to that moment and read what the creators of Maybe Happy Ending had to say in response to the widespread backlash that the casting announcement received. And let's get ready to rant. We would like to share some thoughts on the collective casting decision of Andrew Barth Feldman in Maybe Happy Ending. We have spent days trying to find words that perfectly encompass all of our feelings, but as we watch the pain escalate, have decided it is better to simply share our incomplete thoughts and hope they are taken in the spirit of heartfelt conversation. For months, we have been inundated with comments from people who previously knew nothing about Korea, but after watching Maybe Happy Ending, are now either planning trips to Jeju, deep diving into Korean culture, or even learning the Korean language. This is incredibly meaningful to a Korean-American writing team who met and write in NYC, but are deeply immersed in Korean culture. Our dream at the outset was that our allegorical robot show could one day miraculously become part of the American musical theater canon, a modern fantastics able to be comfortably performed by anyone anywhere, yet distinctly set in Korea. This went against prevailing wisdom that we needed to set our show in America. We wrote a show about robots so we could engage more intimately with the most basic human questions of love and loss, creating the roles of Oliver and Claire to be avatars of these universal questions. They are meant to be products created by a global company, and so never bore Korean names even in the Korean version of the show. At the same time, we understand that for many in the AAPI community, the makeup of our opening night cast became a meaningful and rare point of visibility. We've heard how strongly people connected to that representation even if it wasn't our original intent, and how this casting decision has reopened old wounds. So, the first assertion being made is that Oliver and Claire, the robots, were made by a company that wanted them to be universal, so they have Anglicanized names and wouldn't necessarily look Asian. They'd come in every race. I can kinda see that, but then we have to look at the context of the whole show here. You just said this is supposed to be uniquely set in South Korea and how it was so important to the musical that you maintained it in translation to the US despite the warnings you received. So with that in mind, why shouldn't they be Asian? Remember, this is a show with only 4 actors, and the 2 main leads, the helper bots, take up the vast majority of stage time. Wouldn't it be a weird waste of opportunity when it comes to representation to have 2 non-Asian actors on stage for the vast majority of your authentic South Korean set, South Korean story? Well, this then leads into the second assertion we get in this post, that it wasn't their original intent at all to platform Asian representation in the show. Like, that sounds insane, but listen to their statement again. We've heard how strongly people connected to that representation, even if it wasn't our original intent. They seem to be acting surprised that the viewers took note of one of the first ever Broadway shows to have an all-Asian cast. They're later gonna return to that line about how their intentions didn't match up with how the show was received. But, even if it wasn't your original intention, having received the feedback that you did, wouldn't you realize by now that those intentions are irrelevant? Yeah, you've made the creative decision that the company behind HelperBots would probably want to make robots in all races. But is that kind of in-universe detail more important than the opportunity for such great representation? Is this not hair-splitting just so you can get away with casting a white guy? At this point, on slide 2 of 4, the post was starting to confuse me. But it's about to get a whole lot worse. Let's go to slide 3. Throughout the American development, we tried various approaches to casting. At some points along the journey, we cast the roles explicitly as Asian, thinking it might help make the setting more quickly apparent. However, on seeing that, we also were not satisfied. To say that seeing any Asian actor on stage quickly suggests Korea seemed not only like a stretch, but regressive or even offensive to the uniqueness of Korean culture. By the time we came to Broadway with a set design filled with Korean language, the robot roles were once again ethnically undefined, and our Broadway casting breakdown reflected this. The actors were cast because they fit the roles. In Oliver/Darren's case, it was his ability to project boyishness and innocence with a not leading man Broadway belt style of voice. Let's start at the beginning. I understand the idea that equating Korean and Asian as if they're interchangeable in terms of culture, language, place, and people is just factually wrong and also reductive and harmful. But there's a limit to using this as an excuse or shield from criticism. For all of history, movies, TV, stage, etc., Asian actors have played characters of different ethnicities. Latin actors have played characters from different countries. African actors have played characters from different ethnic groups and countries, and Native American actors have played characters from different tribes. I know that there are nuances to each of these, and I'm not saying it's good or ideal, but I just want to say the obvious, which is that this is extremely common and accepted in the modern day to cast actors who do not perfectly match the ethnic background of the character that they are portraying. But race inappropriate casting, like casting a white guy to play an Asian, for example, that is a completely different thing that is never okay, and today's audiences understand that. There was actually an entire Tony-winning play about it on Broadway the exact same year. As conversations around representation have advanced, many have argued that actors should share their characters' ethnicities, especially when it's a deeply personal story innately tied to one's culture. But one, maybe Happy Ending is not one of those stories, and two, we are not at the point in society where casting an Asian actor to play an Asian character of a different ethnicity would in and of itself cause an uproar. And you want to know my evidence for this? Half Filipino Darren Criss was cast as Oliver and Chinese American Helen J. Shen as Claire, and people applauded the history-making representation, especially Asian American theater fans. Not trying to generalize, but from what I've heard and read, most people saw this as a great step forward at the very least. Okay, so having explained why it would actually be problematic to cast non-Koreans to play characters in South Korea, the creators then have to explain, why they ended up doing exactly that. And they say that Darren and Helen weren't cast at all because of their race, but because they fit the roles best. Yeah, fully, we picked the best person for the job, regardless of race. They are fully trying to convince you, a likely high school graduate, that the original Oliver and Claire, including all their alternates, being Asian, was a coincidence. A coincidence. Do you see why I really started to get enraged at this point? I'm sorry, but this is what's offensive. Offensive to our intelligence. Guys, it's an Asian show. It's okay to just say that you wanted to cast Asian people. That is not an idea that anybody asked you to defend. But you're shifting the conversation to make it about that as a pure distraction. It's like you're trying to out-woke your critics by accusing your mostly Asian critics of actually perpetuating anti-Asian stereotypes and sentiment themselves. Yeah, believe it or not, that didn't actually go over very well with their fans who were criticizing them in the first place. And just in case you want to give them the teensiest sliver of a doubt, thinking, well, you can't prove that they're lying, actors on Broadway have saved the original casting calls for the roles and proved that, obviously, they asked for actors of Asian American and Pacific Islander backgrounds to audition. We just picked the right person for the role, regardless of race, is an inherently racist statement because it protects the majority group, i.e. white people. It's the excuse white people use to push back against racial inclusion. When a traditionally white role, or even a brand new role, is cast with an actor of color, people talk about forced diversity. But when a character of color is being played by a white person, oh, well, race doesn't matter. Just cast the person best for the part. Why do you have to bring race into it? And yes, in theater, casting non-white actors in roles that were written for white people in mind is much more normalized compared to film or TV. But that is an explicit response to how undiverse Broadway has been historically. It really needs to be stressed, for most of its existence, Broadway has been overwhelmingly white, more so than even Hollywood. Not to mention it has a much higher barrier of entry for new actors, making any change slow-going and difficult. So if you want a diverse cast, you kinda do need to either cast non-white actors for quote-unquote white parts, or write more roles with actors of color specifically in mind, which is exactly what happened with Maybe Happy Ending. To whitewash one of the few explicitly Asian roles on Broadway, one of the few roles that an Asian actor could be safely considered for, in the year of our Lord, 2025, was to turn a major step forward into a step backwards. So because I can't film a video without something going wrong technically at some point, it seems in my furor I've killed my camera, or maybe it just killed itself because of the words that it was hearing. So we're gonna finish the video with my webcam, and I'm gonna figure out a way to fix this when I have the energy to. In addition to what I was saying before, I just want to highlight that it's also wrong, like factually wrong, to apply the right person for the role argument to Darren's case. Firstly, he's like a producer of the musical, so I'm sure money had something to do with him being cast, but I couldn't find out the exact timeline details. Secondly, I'm sure he was considered because he is a high-profile Asian actor. No, he's not fully Asian nor Korean, but it would still be in keeping with the all-Asian/Asian American cast, and along with those criteria, he has the perfect personality and charisma for the part of Oliver, and can sing, duh. It's all right to admit that race was one of many aspects that were important for the role. It's when you pretend to be colorblind that issues start. Now, the phrase, "we just picked the right person for the role," is an inaccurate statement for Darren's casting. But the thing is, it wasn't really about Darren. They're talking about Andrew. They're trying to plant in your brain that Andrew was just the best person that they could find to replace Darren. And the thing is, it's just as inaccurate for him, albeit for different reasons. No, ABF was not cast because he was best for the role. He was cast because he's famous and he's Helen's boyfriend IRL, which sparks intrigue, and probably because he has some inroads with people on Broadway. Was Andrew cast explicitly because he's white? No. But was it a coincidence that he's white? Also no. The people on Broadway who have the most power, sway, and experience are usually white as a natural result of them being offered the most opportunities. It's a product of the past. It's what systemic racism is. They could have picked another Asian actor to replace Darren, but sadly there are none as famous as him because there are barely any famous male Broadway actors, period. So they had to choose between casting an unknown or little-known Asian actor to maintain the representation, or picking a famous non-Asian actor. And we all saw what they chose. Also, gotta take note of the weird underhanded jab at Darren here, his not leading man Broadway belt style voice they say about the man who literally just won their show the Tony for Best Lead Actor. And if you say that that wasn't supposed to be a jab, then I say they shouldn't have phrased it that way. Okay, on to slide number 4. Let's put this to bed. Over the last several years, we have been heartened to see Asian performers playing Evan Hansen, Orpheus, Abe Lincoln, Sally Bowles, and others. Leading roles for Asian performers have long been painfully scarce, and these shows excitingly made gestures towards universality with expansive casting, and rightly gave opportunities to actors from identity categories who previously had few options. With Maybe Happy Ending, we wanted to write a show in which every role could be played by an Asian performer, but without the intention that the robot roles always would be. We're extremely saddened that the show, a decade-long labor of love for us, could ever become a source of confusion, anger, or pain. We hope this gives a small window into our thought process in the creation of Maybe Happy Ending. We're so grateful for the artists and audiences who've embraced this story, and we will continue our conversations as Maybe Happy Ending continues its journey on stage. Let's talk about how these roles are not all the same, and in doing so, acknowledge kind of the elephant in the room for the whole discussion. Remember when I mentioned some of the most famous Asian actors on Broadway in recent years, like to name a few, Philippa Soo, Ava Noblezada Carney, Nicole Scherzinger? Do you notice anything about these roles? Yeah, it's no secret that rep for Asian men is especially bad. And I don't think it's a coincidence that when Maybe Happy Ending wanted to cast a famous Asian man as a lead, they got a white passing biracial Asian man. Sadly, for a lot of racist reasons, Asian men aren't commonly seen as romantic leads, not just for musicals, but film and TV too. As a result, they tend to get fewer opportunities than women. Saying it's okay, the other roles in the musical remain reserved for Asian actors isn't good enough because a supporting role does not have the same weight as a leading one, and Asian actors deserve to be leading players. Darren's performance nabbed the first ever Tony for Best Actor in a Musical for an actor of Asian descent, and this truly could have been a star-making role for the next actor who assumed the part. But the first thing they did since he won was hand the role over to a white man. All of this statement is insulting. Trying to pull the wool over our eyes by telling us that the all-Asian cast was just a coincidence, trying to convince us that they were surprised it became a moment for Asian representation, trying to imply that we're misremembering how heavily discussed the Asian rep was, trying to make us feel stupid for deducing that Oliver and Claire are roles meant to be played by Asian people based on the original casting choices and setting. And it's that disrespect for fans that pissed me off so much. Fans in the wider theater community overwhelmingly responded to the casting choice negatively, with countless thoughtful arguments articulating how this will harm audiences by denying them representation on stage, how it's establishing a precedent that will deprive Asian actors of roles, how it's whitewashing a character that everyone and their mom perceive to be Asian. Aronson and Park, in response, chose to leverage their authority as creators to shut down the conversation altogether. In short, sidestep the entire discussion by saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but this is how we're gonna do it, and we're the creators." The thing is, their fans know that they have the right to make whatever casting decisions they want. We're disappointed by their complete ignorance of or willful disregard for the impact of their actions. I'm sorry, but I don't care if you never intended these roles to be played by Asian actors, an assertion I still don't believe, by the way. At this point, the role that this musical has on Broadway is more important than your desire to cast a celebrity. And if you really cared about the AAPI theater community, if you wanted your show to make a difference, you would understand that. But instead of seizing the opportunity to make a meaningful positive impact, they did this. They went so far as to redefine the roles, even if it meant retroactively erasing the impact that this show has had on Broadway by making it official policy ordained by the showrunners that this is not a work of Asian or Asian American theater, but instead a human story with ethnically ambiguous leads. And of course, doing so after they've collected all of their accolades for it. This statement is a blanket shield that any future production can use to cast white people as Claire and Oliver without controversy. The creators said it was okay, and they created it, so who are you to argue with them? Well, I'm sorry to Aronson and Park, but this isn't a creative debate about death of the author. This is about duty to the wider theater community, including the diehard fans that propped up this little show and kept up the word of mouth until it became a box office success and a hit at the Tonys. To redefine the roles as racially ambiguous to make casting easier might have seemed like a survival strategy. After all, celebrities bring in audiences, and widening the casting net would certainly make it more appealing and easier for those looking to license the show in the future. But if you stood your ground, you'd be guaranteeing roles for Asian theater actors for years to come. Wasting that is nothing less than throwing Asian actors under the bus for the worst reason of all: money. One of the most insidious parts of this whole debacle, and the last thing I want to discuss, is the position that it's put the actors in. Since this statement was posted on Instagram, the creators have said nothing further on the issue. But Helen J. Shen put out a statement of her own, and Christopher James Tomeo, an alternate for the show, was in the comments of the creator's statement. His comment, I really don't like. No offense, but it seems to come from a place of fear or pain. He talks about being Asian as if it's something he feels the need to apologize for, and the whole thing has this aura of, don't criticize the Broadway overlords too hard or else I'll never cast an Asian in a musical ever again. As if audiences and actors alike should be thankful for whatever sort of representation they get and never dare to ask for more. Fellow Asian Americans in the reply have pointed out the model minority vibes that this remark gives off, and I kind of have to agree. He also references the vilification that has dominated these conversations and that we need to start coming to the table in good faith. This tactic is like my least favorite whenever people are responding to criticism, and it has never been less applicable than in this situation. I'm sorry, but you can go back and find the original posts announcing Andrew. People in the comments were uniformly respectful, polite, and focused on the issue at hand, not getting personal. Almost everyone prefaced their statement with how much they love the show, and many said the same thing about Andrew. They were just being firm. Helen J. Shen's statement was just sad. Reading slightly between the lines, she seems to be in agreement to at least a certain degree with fans who are against the casting choice, But also, she says she's excited to work opposite her real-life partner, and I can't exactly fault her for that. There's also this line that seems to suggest that others in the production are also troubled by the casting choice. If that's the case, then this makes this even worse. These people don't have any control over casting decisions, and publicly disagreeing with the creators would probably be unwise for their careers. Like, I criticize Christopher James Tomeo's statement, but truthfully, I do understand his defensiveness. He's trying to protect his job. We have no idea what is going on behind the scenes at the Belasco Theater, if it's tense, if there's pressure to defend the creators, if anyone was explicitly asked to put out a statement. But regardless, none of these people should have to answer for a decision that they did not make. The creators who wrote this statement and anyone else involved in casting alone should have to answer for it. And in case you're wondering, yes, I do think that should include Andrew Barth Feldman. In my opinion, he never should have put himself out there for this role. He really should have known better. And once he saw the pain that his announcement triggered, he should have backed out. Now, maybe it was too late and the show wouldn't have had time to find a full-time replacement, but in that case, at least put out a statement saying that you're sorry and that you didn't realize the impact that your action would have. To summarize, I'm hurt and I'm angry. I feel betrayed as a fan, and I can't imagine how East Asian fans of the musical feel. So what do? Do we disown the musical? Do we boycott it? In my mind, if you want to do either of those things, I positively would not blame you, especially if you're an Asian fan who feels let down. I likewise wouldn't blame you if this whole saga kind of ruined the whole show in your mind, or at the very least tainted it. It has, sadly, to a certain extent, tainted it for me as well. After seeing the show 3 times, I made the choice to not spend any money on it since the casting choice was announced, even though I really would have liked to see it again, and I was literally in New York seeing shows at the time. But despite the widespread backlash and criticism that casting ABF garnered the musical, it didn't hurt them at the box office. Most theatergoers, white, don't care enough, or at least don't know enough. However, I don't think the criticism went completely unheard. No, the creators did not backtrack on the statement and report that actually Oliver and Claire should always be played by Asian actors, which I really think they should do, but they did announce that they're bringing back Darren for at least a short run. By the time you watch this video, he will be back at the Belasco performing. This could be interpreted many different ways. You could see this cynically as them frantically trying to win back fans by bringing back the favorite, but you could also interpret it as they knew they messed up with their last choice. For me, we'll only truly know if they learn from their mistakes by whomever they cast next. I certainly hope the entire cast remains Asian going forward, and that this will hopefully set the precedent for future productions, such as tours and licensed shows, rather than this weird-ass statement setting the precedent. I don't think that Will Aronson and Hugh Park will ever undo the harm that they did to their reputation, especially among Asian theater fans. But as a fan of this show, and a huge fan of theater, I hope they'll do the next best thing. I'm gonna see the show again sometime, I'll be honest. Fans are going to continue to show up. The actors and the crew behind the scenes are going to continue to show up. I just hope that the production shows up for them.
We wanted to keep the whole thing under wraps. You might have observed something fishy perhaps and wondered what it means. Now we're ready to spill the beans. I love Jenny.
And I just want to say that Constance Wu publicly responded to and agreed with an Instagram comment of mine, so if nothing else comes out of this nonsense, I'll always have that.